The House Committee on General Laws will now come to order. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Chairman Trent.
Here.
Vice Chair Riley. Here. Representatives Meredith. Boggs. Brown.
Here.
Davidson. Here. Hardwick. Here. Hurlburt. Present. Engel. Pollitt. Here. Rogers. Here. Schnelting. Here. Schroer. Schwadron. Here. Sharp. And Weber.
Good evening, everyone. We will begin with a public hearing for House Bill 2163. Representative Hawks, please come forward and you may proceed when ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Dan Hawks, Representative Johnson, Pettis County in the 54th District. Tonight we have House Bill 2163, which you guys have all heard. And Mr. Chairman, we've heard for about 6 years. This has a bill dealing with speculator, which pretty simple. If you're a person going through a divorce, once the divorce proceedings have been filed and you pass away, your body goes back to your immediate family. It's a simple bill. It passed out of the House last year, 54-0, passed out of this committee unanimously. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions for the bill sponsor from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for that succinct explanation.
Thank you.
Individuals here to testify in favor, House Bill 2163. Please come forward and make sure you fill out your witness card. You may proceed when ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Sam Licklider here for the Missouri Funeral Directors and Embalmers Association. It just gives us, the situation with the divorce gives us a little bit of security and that nobody is going to get all upset. Because right now, if you're in the middle of a divorce and you die, and I understand that divorces can be somewhat rancorous, so you're liable to end up on the new island that's being developed out there. I have no idea why it's taken so daggone long to get this thing done, but it's just a function of the system. Well, I think 1 year we got it passed, and then somebody added an amendment dealing with sky burials or something.
Well, don't give them any ideas.
I won't. No. No. Yeah, the Darth Vader bill. Yeah. I'll be happy to answer any questions or attempt there too.
Thank you for that testimony. Any questions for this witness from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here this evening, as always. Further witnesses here to testify in favor, House Bill 2163. Seeing none, are any witnesses here to testify in opposition to House Bill 2163? Seeing none, are there any witnesses here to testify for informational purposes only? Seeing none, that will conclude the public hearing for House Bill 2163. Thank you. Next, we will have a public hearing for House Bill 1722. Representative Shields, please come forward. You may proceed when ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Brenda Shields. I represent District 11 in Northwest Missouri. I'm here tonight to introduce House Bill 1772, Stop the Bleed, Bleeding Control Kits. This piece of legislation, as written, requires Stop the Bleed kits in every classroom in our state, as well as to ensure that all of our teachers and our district personnel are trained to use these kits in case of an emergency. In the Missouri legislature, both the freshman and sophomore classes have received training on Stop the Bleed kits. If you attended freshman tour and visited Truman Medical Center at University Health, we learned that the training is short and effective in saving lives, and I believe that our teachers and our school personnel deserve the same training. So to talk a little bit about the history of Stop the Bleed. The Stop the Bleed became a national program because of a great tragedy. The Stop the Bleed kits were developed in 2012 after the shooting at Sandy Hook. The event led trauma surgeons from the American College of Surgeons to convene experts in the field of emergency medical response, the U.S. military, and law enforcement to create training to stop the bleed. as well as the Stop the Bleed kits. And currently there are over 1.5 million people trained in Stop the Bleed. There are several states that have implemented legislation, including Texas, Indiana, Georgia, and Arkansas. And we also have many schools in Missouri that have 1 or 2 kits in their school, and they have individuals trained. We know that this is necessary because individuals can bleed out in minutes of a severe wound if they're not trained on what to do. So I believe by training all of our teacher and school administrators in how to use a bleeding control kit and having these kits readily available will allow our teachers to help save a student or any other person's life that might put their hand through a window, fall down a flight of stairs, or get hurt on the playground. So when I decided to follow this legislation several years ago, I went looking for a partner, and I found a partner in the Missouri Hospital Association that said that they would willingly, free of charge, be willing to train all of our teachers and personnel on how to use these Stop the Bleed kits. Also, just recently, I've been contacted by the American College of Surgeons, the group that helped develop the kits, and they want to be a partner too, and have suggested a few technical changes to the bill that I have in front of you, and hope that you will consider these changes when you create a House Committee substitute. The one suggestion that I think has kind of been a stumbling block is they believe that we can get by with large Stop the Bleed kits in several central locations in our school, near vocational classrooms where accidents might happen, where gatherings might be in cafeterias and gymnasiums, and I think that that will bring down the cost of this quite a bit. They also have some standardized language that they're trying to pass in all states that they would like for us to consider. So many years ago, we thought that doctors could be the only people that could save the life of someone that was having a heart attack. We now require all teachers and students to have CPR training. We teach individuals how to do the Heimlich maneuver instead of letting them choke to death. And we have AEDs in many public places that we have in our schools and that people are trained. It's now time that we take advantage of this life-saving tool and stop the bleed that was developed for lay people so they can help someone from bleeding out. Let's empower our teachers instead of having them feel helpless in the case of an emergency. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions from the committee. And I do have some experts, an expert behind me that can answer even more questions about this.
Thank you for that presentation. Do you have the language that you want to see included in an amendment available?
No, I would just like to talk to you about it. Some of it is just really technical, just changes. The most important one was the amount of kits that we need. The other is I had exempted out schools that had already kind of started their own program, and they wanted to be all standardized so that every school kind of is doing the same thing. And of course, this is both for our public schools and our charter schools as well. And then there was some really just teeny technical language.
Do you have any sense of where schools are at currently on this? Like, is this something where everybody's starting from ground zero, or do you think schools are part of their way down the road on this?
We have a few schools that, through their communities, have purchased Stop the Bleed kits and taught some key personnel and Stop the Bleed. One of the other changes that the bill said that each year the school would make sure that there were 5 people trained, kind of train the trainer and Stop the Bleed. And they really suggested that we make that one individual, and that be the school nurse that would be the person that would be trained in that as a trainer and Stop the Bleed. So that was another small change that they wanted to make.
I see the language requires certain, or at least it would seem to suggest certain particular kinds of products be contained in these kits. But it seems to have enough discretion in there so that as medical science progresses or standards change, that there be enough flexibility for schools to have a little. It wouldn't have to be completely standardized. If they needed some special types of resources in these kits, they'd be able to do that. Is that your understanding?
Yes, they could certainly add. These are really the very basics that you need. But as he will tell you today when he talks with you, and I will now tell you, that the kits are important, but the training is what's most important. That people learn how they can apply pressure, what they can use to pack with, that the kits are important, but the training is what's really going to save lives.
All right. Thank you, Representative. Any other questions from the committee? Yes, Representative Weber, please proceed.
Yes.
Proceed.
Sorry.
Thank you, Representative. At first, I guess I want to make a comment. So Truman Medical Center is actually in my district, and that was a great training when we went and did the freshman tour. That was amazing to just participate and show us how to actually do it on the dummies and things like that. So that was really good. Chairman Trent actually took a lot of my questions. So I guess one of the question is, what's a little bit like the history of this bill? Did it end up just dying in committee? Did it go on the floor?
Well, the first year I filed it, it was COVID, and we were trying really hard to clump a lot of things together before we went home. It died that year, and I really, I think last year it just died like all deaths did when we got to the end of session and the Senate shut down. Just to be honest. And just a little history for me why this is important. I've been carrying a Stop the Bleed kit in my car for probably 5 years. I was trained, and I carry it. I have them in all my cars because I feel as if I ever come upon a scene of an accident, which I hope I don't, but if I do, that I have the necessary tools to not feel helpless and watch something happen.
Agree. I think that is it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Further questions for the bill sponsor? Yes, Representative Schwadron, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening. What is the approximate shelf life of a kit?
Longer than you think. There is only, we need to ask the doctor, but there's that stop bleeding kind of gel that's in there that has a shelf life, but the tourniquet, if not used, doesn't have a shelf life, or not for a very long time. The gauze, the other packing materials don't necessarily have shelf lives.
Would you happen to know the cost of the gel then?
I do not have the cost of that.
Okay, probably a question for your witness. All right, thank you very much.
Further questions? Yes, Representative, proceed.
To inquire. Thank you. Just had a quick question. So would this apply for coaches or any coaching athletic sports? I'm just thinking, sometimes that can happen on the field. So how would that?
All personnel in the school would be trained in how to stop the bleed, so that would include coaches as well. And janitorial staff, cafeteria workers, I mean, you never know when you're going to be the person that is the closest by the situation.
Further questions for the bill sponsor? Seeing none. Thank you for that presentation.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Witnesses here to testify in favor of House Bill number 1722. Please come forward. Make sure you filled out your witness card. You may proceed when ready.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Committee. My name's Dr. Jeffrey Kokenauer. I've been a trauma surgeon now for about 15 years. Currently the chief of trauma at the University of Missouri in Columbia. And I don't know if it matters, but I graduated residency at Truman and UMKC. So Representative Shields took a little bit of my thunder about the history. I would just point out that trauma continues to be the number one cause of death in patients age 1 to about 45. And then when you begin to add in cancers and heart disease and other things later in life, we usually fall down to about 4th place overall. But it's still something that, we consider as a disease process, just like breast cancer and colon cancer and everything else. It's not just kind of a freak of nature when crosses get put up and flowers get put out, but it's a disease process. And in that way, we know how to prevent it and we know how to prepare for it and treat it. And I think the Stop the Bleed initiative is one of those things. The American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma has put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, no pun intended, into this initiative. We at our center have trained about 4,000 individuals. Many of the other trauma centers across Missouri have done similar numbers over the last several years. We currently have deployed 175 of these Stop the Bleed kits across the University of Missouri-Columbia campus. And there were 10 additional kits purchased from a rural electric co-op grant that are in all the rural schools around Boone County. So to answer the question of has this begun, it has in certain isolated pockets of the state, but certainly not statewide. One comment I'll make about the fiscal note, whether we did individual kits in each classroom or whether we did these multiple patient kits that are more centrally located, such as AEDs, I think the initial cost is probably not super different. There certainly may be some savings when you think about just putting one or two in a building or in a series of buildings, especially for smaller rural schools. That will probably realize some savings. The other point I would make in that regard is that there's a discussion about recurrent costs. The training, both initial and recurrent, will be free of charge. Every trauma center across the state of Missouri already does this class, both for healthcare providers and for the lay public. So we think beginning to partner with the Missouri Association of School Nurses and having the healthcare professionals within the school become certified as instructors, and then being able to further disseminate through teachers, coaches, any other staff. If they'd like to do it on their own, fantastic. If they want help from the Regional Trauma Center, then we'll be there. A note about the shelf life and recurrent costs. All of the kits that we deployed across the Mizzou campus are just with plain gauze for the packing, so there is no expiration date whatsoever. If you ordered kits with what is called hemostatic gauze, which is what a lot of EMS or special operations medics would carry, that's just regular gauze that's impregnated with a chemical that helps it creates a procoagulant effect. So without going into it, that gauze is probably a little more effective than plain gauze, but not much. That raises the cost of the kits a little bit, and that stuff has a shelf life of about 5 years. So if you think a school has 2 kits, each multi-use kit has 8 individual kits, and even if you stock those with hemostatic gauze, my math, that averages out to about $60 a year if you have to replace those, because one of those impregnated gauze rolls is about $20 to replace. So I think, again, if you'd put them all with just plain gauze, then you have an indefinite shelf life and a lack of recurrent costs. So both on behalf of the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma Missouri chapter and the Mitchell Trauma Center at the University of Missouri, we are ecstatic to support House Bill 1722 and happy to entertain questions.
Thank you for that testimony. Questions for this witness from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you all.
Additional witnesses here to testify in favor of House Bill 1722.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Tricia Workman here today on behalf of the Missouri Charter Public School Association. I'm going to go on record in support of this bill. It is not a uniform practice across our schools, but we do believe it would be a good idea to standardize it. Some schools are doing it, but not all. So we look forward to working with the sponsor and moving this legislation forward.
Thank you for that testimony. Questions for this witness from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here this evening. Additional witnesses testify in support.
Chair, members of the committee, Jessica Petrie here on behalf of BJC Healthcare. As you can imagine, our emergency departments in our hospitals see a lot of these really tragic accidents and other incidents, and we think standardizing this practice across schools will save lives and help prevent even more serious injuries, and we really appreciate the sponsor working on that.
Thank you for that testimony. Questions for this witness from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here this evening. Additional witnesses to testify in support House Bill 1722. Seeing none, any witnesses here to testify in opposition House Bill 1722? Seeing none, are there any witnesses here to testify for informational purposes only? Seeing none, that will conclude the public hearing on House Bill 1722. Next, we will go to public hearing for House Bill 2094. Representative Murphy, please proceed when ready.
Good evening. I'm Representative Jim Murphy from South St. Louis County, and I'm nicked myself, and now I'm bleeding, and I need a stop the bleed kit. I'm here today to present House Bill 2094. It's a very simple bill. It basically, this bill specifies that the offense of furnishing or attempting to furnish pornographic material to minors is a Class D felony if the person furnishing or attempting to furnish pornographic material to a minor is a school employee, and the minor to whom such person furnishes or attempts to furnish pornography material is a student. However, the offense is a Class C felony if it's a multiple offense. Basically, this bill came about, there's a little bit of uproar as to what is pornography and so forth, and this bill does not get into that. It does not change the definition of pornography as we define in 167-800. But as I looked into this with complaints from people, I looked at our current statute, and it says that if you give pornographic material to a minor, it's a Class A misdemeanor. And I thought in schools, we have a little higher bar than that. That if you're an employee of a school, if you're a janitor or you're a teacher or you're a librarian or whatever, and you're giving them pornographic material, that you've done something that really is just much more than a misdemeanor. So this just raises the penalty for school employees, and with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you for that presentation. Questions for this witness or for this bill sponsor? Yes, Representative Rogers, please proceed.
Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
And we talked right before the committee hearing, and I meant to catch you earlier today.
Right.
I support your bill. I think it's a good bill, and I was actually surprised that this wasn't already the law. So 2 questions for you. One is, you go to the D felony, which is probably about where it ought to be. But would you be open to just, why not just come right out with the C from the beginning? If you're a person in a position of authority giving porn to a kid, we got a problem, right?
And part of that is how hard it is to define what porn is. We see books in schools today that some people would swear is pornography, and others say, no, this is just learning material. The Supreme Court defined it one time and said, well, it's hard to define, but you know it when you see it, type of thing. So the first offense, you might give them a little leeway, saying, well, you didn't know that this really fell into that. You should have probably, but you didn't. But it's certainly, if you're a school employee, you should know. So it should be at least a D felony. But I'd be willing to go to a C. I really would.
I appreciate that. And I'm thinking about this and I still actively take some criminal defense cases, and I prosecuted for a long time. And if you're a prosecutor, you're deciding, okay, I'm going to file this case or not. You've got to be thinking about it as if you're going to get 12 reasonable jurors to convict on something.
Right.
And even in the most conservative parts of the state, you better be pretty sure you got pornography if you're going to try to ask 12 people to convict somebody of a felony, right? And so there's just a natural protection there, I think, for somebody who is having something that may be objectionable but is not necessarily pornography.
Right.
And then the last question I've got is, I was surprised, and I should know this, and I didn't. Unfortunately, it's not something I dealt with when I was a prosecutor, but I'm surprised it's a misdemeanor at all. Now, you can come up with a ton of hypotheticals where you still feel pretty uncomfortable pretty quickly, like you had an 18-year-old and a 17-year-old, and they're sharing a Playboy back and forth. God forbid somebody ends up a felon out of that, but I think
actually a Playboy. When you read the definition, it's broad enough, but it's also it defines it well enough to know that a Playboy probably isn't pornography.
But the point remains, if you got an 18-year-old kid and a 17-year-old kid passing objectionable material back and forth, that's probably a bad idea, but it's certainly not anything somebody should be convicted of a felony over is my point. So anyway, I'm rambling at this point, but I appreciate the bill and thank you for bringing it forward.
Thank you.
Further questions for the bill sponsor from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for that presentation, gentlemen. Witnesses here to testify in support of House Bill 2094. Seeing none, any witnesses here to testify in opposition House Bill 2094. Seeing none, are there any witnesses here to testify for informational purposes only? Seeing none, that will conclude the public hearing on House Bill 2094. We will next turn the committee over to Vice Chairman Riley for the final bill.
Okay, we are now going to move to public hearing on House Bill 2169, presented by Representative Trent. And Mr. Chair, please proceed whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Curtis Trent, State Representative, District 133. I will be succinct as well this evening. This is a bill the committee has heard before. It is the governing legislation for the Article 5 Convention of State call that Missouri is currently a part of. If everyone will remember, last year the General Assembly re-upped our Article 5 call, made that indefinite, but we fell short of this companion bill, which merely enables the General Assembly to set guidelines around the conduct of commissioners, how the commissioners are selected, and their behavior, the things they may vote on, and how their rules will operate should an Article 5 convention be called. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the bill sponsor? Seeing none. Is there anyone here to testify in support of House Bill 2169? Please come forward and fill out a witness card.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to appear in front of your committee and committee members today. My name is Brett Sturley. I'm a resident of House District 135, and I am the volunteer for the Convention of States Action organization as Missouri State Director, testifying in support of HB 2169. As Representative Trent said, the General Assembly passed the Convention of States resolution. The underlying resolution back in 2017 reaffirmed it this last session, removing the sunset clause. The next step is to determine how you as Missouri legislators will select commissioners to represent the state of Missouri at any Article 5 Convention of States meeting. And that's what HB 2169 does. This is the same bill as HB 836 that passed this committee 11-4 last year, passed the Senate, and ran out of time on the House floor before a floor vote. Now, HB 2169 involves House and Senate leadership in the selection of the commissioner selection, this commissioner search committee, the entire legislature in approving who will represent Missouri at any Article 5 Convention of States meeting, the entire state providing eligible commissioner candidates, and includes your constituents as well. This ensures the best solutions for returning the decision-making process back to the legislature where it belongs. And that provided that any of those solutions are germane to the guidelines that were set in the application that at least 34 states have passed in order to call the Convention of States meeting. Now, a supermajority of Americans surveyed from across the political spectrum agree that D.C. does too much, spends too much, and stays there too long. They also agree that D.C. will never, ever do anything to correct any of those issues. And that's held true for decades, regardless of which party is in the White House, which party controls the majority in Congress. And the framers understood this as well and provided you with a tool to oversee the federal government. Now, this is a nonpartisan issue. This is evident in the progress of the Convention of States Project resolution that Missouri has passed along with 16 other states. It takes 34 actually to call the Convention of States meeting. Just in the past 3 weeks, Wisconsin became state number 16, Nebraska became state number 17 to pass the resolution. The resolution is also passed in committees in Iowa, Pennsylvania, South Dakota, and in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts committee, it passed, is a Democrat-controlled committee, proving this a nonpartisan issue, passed that committee hearing unanimously. Committee votes are pending in several other states as well. So I ask for your support, HB 2169, and thank you for your service, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Representative Schnelting, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Thank you for being here, Mr. Sturley. Question in regards to the exceptions here of those who can be a commissioner. Line 16 says, an employee of the United States. Do you interpret that to include members of the armed forces?
I would not interpret that as being members of the armed forces. That would be, the intent of that line is to be like federal contractors and those who are actual employees directly of the federal government that you're trying to oversee.
So then you would be amenable if we did not have a special protection to ensure that a member of the armed forces could be a commissioner. Would you be amenable? Would your organization be amenable to a change of that nature? Just clarifying.
Yeah, I believe so. Yes.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Any additional questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Sturley. Is there anyone else to testify in support of House Bill 2169? Yes, sir. Please come forward and proceed when ready and fill out a witness form, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, everybody, for letting me to speak. My name is Rosendo Martinez. I am the convention, the Missouri COS legislative liaison, and I'm over here trying to have you people approve the HB 2169. The reason I became involved in the Convention of State is because I'm afraid of what's happening to the United States. I am afraid the United States is becoming another Cuba. I was born in Cuba, and came here to go to college in 1958, and at that time, everybody was pro Castro. Everybody was pro Castro. And the reason that everybody was pro Castro was because they used to get on the radio and basically brainwash everybody. There was one neighbor that was against Fidel Castro, one of our neighbors, because she said that she knew Fidel Castro from Havana University, and he was a communist. And my father didn't believe her. 2 years later, my parents came over here, refugees, and then they told me what was happening in Cuba. Whenever you think of Fidel Castro's revolution, you think of people fighting on the street. That's not the way that he did it. The way that he did it was just brainwashing the people. He used to tell people to go and throw chains on power lines, put bombs on the streets, just like Antifa was doing over here. And then after he took over, the first thing he did was he went down the list of the gun registration, and he confiscated every gun, just like we're trying to pass gun restriction here in the United States the same way. Then he came along and he convinced people to have to be informers. If you know of anybody that is against the revolution, please let us know. And they put the person in prison. They didn't do that to hurt the guy. They just did that to scare everybody else, just like we have right now, political prisoners in Washington, D.C. Those people have been over there 1 year, and according to the Constitution, they shouldn't be there. But guess what? The only reason they're doing it is just to scare everybody else. He came along and he took away the houses from the landlords, and then he gave it to the rest of the people. All those people, they are pro Castro. You give away something to people. That's the reason that they're trying to let all these illegals coming over here. In the future, you are going to be working for those illegals. Those illegals are going to tell you what to do. It's terrible what's happening. And believe me, I'm really, really scared. When Obama became president, I thought that the United States was going to become a communist country. I moved to the country because I was afraid that I have to feed my family. I had to feed my family. So what did I do? Move to the country. And then Trump came along. I said, oh, good. I don't have to do nothing. Now we got Biden. It took Fidel Castro about 4 or 5 years to control the whole nation. Right now we got 1 year, and we don't have much left. We have to go to Convention of State. We have to bring the power to you guys. You have to take away the power from the federal government. If you don't like what's happening on one state, you can always move to another state. So if I don't have any question, I'll be glad to answer. And thank you for letting me speak.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, sir, for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank you to you.
Is there anyone else here to testify in support of House Bill 2169? Seeing none, is there anyone here to testify in opposition to House Bill 2169? Seeing none, is there anyone here to testify for informational purposes only? Seeing none, that concludes the public hearing on House Bill 2169 and also concludes our hearing this evening on general laws. We are adjourned.